And without further ado, here is Patrick Arlt talking about ditching your CMS.
Hey everybody, I'm Patrick Arlt. If you would like to follow me on Twitter, I just tweeted a link to my slides, so you now have no excuse to copy things verbatim from my slides. You might miss half the content that way, so just please don't do it. So a little bit about me. I work as an experienced developer. It's the best nebulous title I've been able to give myself. I work at the Esri Portland R&D Center, and previously I worked at a startup called Geoloki that did mobile location tools for developers. So we made a development platform. I worked on our developer website, our documentation design, tools to generate documentation, things like that. And while I was at Geoloki, I really fell in love with making products for developers, making software products, documenting them, figuring out how to onboard people, getting them set up quickly and easily, designing the right tools for them to use. And when Geoloki was acquired by Esri a few years ago, I immediately started working on the Arcgis for Developers website, which was a fairly new initiative inside of Esri to try to do something new and do something really great for the community of developers that had sprung up around ArcGIS over the years, and supporting all of our SDKs and mapping applications and products and APIs and everything. And we also were pursuing ArcGIS developers to reach new markets, markets like the markets Geoloki used to serve, startups, small technology companies, advertising technology, things like that. And they needed a website also that kind of gave them a slightly different experience. So that's what I've been working on. And in true startup fashion, we started really, really small. The first version of the Arcgis for Developers website was one page. We launched one page. It took several months. It's fine. I mean, it was fine. We managed to go to like 6 or 7 pages a few weeks later, which was a good rate of growth. And then we kept adding things. We added some developer tools. You could log in, register applications, get access tokens, create data services, browse content. We started adding all sorts of things to kind of start making it easier to onboard people. And then one day we finally realized there's not actually any documentation on this site, because we just had a page that was, / documentation that linked out to a bunch of other websites. So we were really just kind of delegating all the documentation duty. And eventually we started to realize we need to make the documentation experience more integrated with this really nice experience that we're building for developers. So as we started doing this, it turns out there's actually a lot of doc. There was thousands and thousands of pages of doc and dozens of products and references and guides and tutorials and conceptual doc and standards and all sorts of things spread out across the entire ecosystem. And it all was kind of sitting in an old content management system that used DITA and XML and had publishers, and like 2 people knew how to program it at the company. And it was actually had gotten so bad that teams weren't really writing documentation anymore. Like, it was that painful for them to do. There were entire teams that had built their own other system just so they didn't have to use this. There were teams who maintained things in separate wikis, and then they copied the HTML out of the wiki and just pasted it verbatim into this, so they didn't have to write DITA, and they didn't have to deal with XML, and they didn't have to ask someone to run the publishing jobs. And we were looking at this and we were like, this is completely not how we want. This is completely how us as developers who maintain, small open source projects, it's not how we want to write documentation. Why can't we let people write documentation the same way we're building our developers website? And that kind of led to this thing where, why don't we get away from writing documentation? Because that's like, you can write documentation, that's fine, but why don't we build documentation? Why don't we build an experience around documentation? Why don't we make it easy for people to write documentation in the way that they want? And that then kind of led us to, how could we apply the tools that we already had, building this developer's website, and apply them to writing documentation? And it turns out there were a lot of teams who are sick of using the CMS who really wanted to use some new tools. They were like, we hate using the CMS, it doesn't work for us. We need something different. We really want to write doc. We want to give developers a good experience, but we need We need guidance. We don't know how to build the tools to do that. So that was when my team started working with the documentation authors on some custom tooling and on some good experiences for them writing documentation using the same tools we were already using to build a website. So the first thing we had is we had a static site generator. And if you're familiar with the concept of a static site generator, maybe you've heard of Jekyll or Middleman or DocPad or something like that. But they all share a couple things in common. They all let you treat documents like source code. All the files that you'll ever need are going to exist on your local computer, and you're going to have tools that allow you to take those files and build HTML out of them. And it's almost like a CMS, but instead of all the files sitting in a database on a server that an IT department controls that no one really knows who to talk to about it, all the files are right there. It's completely, you can edit any file, you can do anything with these documents. So it's a very flexible, nice system for managing large quantities of documents. And I'm going to not dwell on this slide too much, but there are some examples if you want to reference the slides later, get some ideas. And the reason we really like doing static sites is they take care of all the hard work for us. They take care of the hard stuff like reusing page layouts, building navigation structures, figuring out URLs for things. They take a lot of the hard parts of building a website off of people writing content and let people like me, who's a front-end developer, take care of that stuff. So it lets writers focus on writing content in a very easy, flexible way, and it lets developers quickly build out experiences. So we settled on Markdown as a document format, and we settled on Markdown for a couple of reasons. One is because we were also using GitHub to manage all of the issues and wikis and everything, and that's all done in Markdown also. And Markdown is pretty awesome. If you don't know what Markdown is, here's a quick little example. It's just some very simple, like here's a header, here's some paragraph with some italic and bold text, and some HTML. It's also got a link, maybe an image. So you can get an idea that Markdown is just this very simple, very unstructured language, but under the hood, Markdown really gives us a lot of advantages in dealing with content and building tools for people who write documentation. Markdown is very extensible. It's so simple at the core, and that's kind of deceiving at first, but we've been able to coerce Markdown into doing some really impressive things. Automatically generating tables of contents, for example. Every article on our website has an automatically generated table of contents that matches the document and the structure of the document that you're looking at precisely. We do lots of things like formatting helpers. If you want to make an email or a Twitter handle, or you want to include some other content, we can do that. And we've written a lot of tools in our static site generator for simply taking a folder full of Markdown, very unstructured, like all of the sample code for our Android API, and actually sorting that out into a navigation structure and a table of contents and an index of all those documents. So we were able to use all these extensions on top of Markdown that we built to give developers and give writers better tools for building out this content. So then finally, the last tool that we really rely a lot on is we rely on Git and we rely on GitHub. And if you're familiar with Git and GitHub, you probably know all this stuff, but developers use Git to manage all their source code. And when you think about what source code is just a lot of text files. And documentation is also just a lot of text files. So there's actually all those same rules apply. We use Git to do things like versioning. Here's version 3, here's version 4, here's version 5. Rolling back files between versions. Oh, we didn't need to release that with version 4. Take this file back to version 3. We use it to do our development workflows. We'll split off different versions of the site. Here's what's launching in June, here's what's launching in July. If you want something to launch in June, do it in the June area. If you want something in July, do it in July. We use Git for release management. We build the sites up to servers on Amazon, and then we can preview all of them. And Git also helps us do collaboration. It helps manage conflicts between edits and documents. So when two authors are editing the same document, it helps manage the conflicts that happen when those two authors try to do different things. And then on top of all that, we have GitHub. And GitHub is used primarily for issues. And this helps a lot because it centralizes all the issues in one place for us. So all the issues for the developer's website go into Git, but a lot of times we'll also get issues in the documentation. This link is broken. There are typos here. We need to add this section to this document. And then the authors know to go and follow up with that. We also put all the wiki content, all of our internal documentation inside of GitHub. And then we have also, GitHub gives us pull requests, which allow people to collaborate on changes. So if someone makes a change, they issue a pull request, and then someone can review that change and merge it into the website. And I'm going to go into demo time here. So I actually have a little demo prepared, and I'm going to show you what this kind of looks like when someone's in this system and in these tools that we're building for them. All right, so I'm going to go into my example. I've got a folder full of code. And here's my write the docs example. I'm going to open that up in a text editor. Also going to open that up in my terminal. And because I know someone's going to ask, the demo's written in Middleman. It's a static site generator that's written in Ruby. I have now eliminated one question I will have to answer at the end that someone will invariably ask me. So let's make that a lot bigger. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to run a command. I'm going to run middleman server. And this is going to start the development server, and it's going to say, oh, there is no server in the list of commands. Let's install it. Oh, there we go. There we go. So it says now, okay, middleman is standing watch. You can go look at your site, http 00004567. So if I go look at that, this is actually some stuff that I made earlier, and it's, look, there's some Markdown. The Markdown is built into HTML. There's a link to some documentation that doesn't exist because this is a demo. But it's okay. So I can go and look at some of these other items and say, there's actually no tutorials. This is sad, and that makes me sad. This is write the docs. I'm going to go write some docs. And I go back into my text editor, and unfortunately my theme is black, and I can't change it right now. So there's a folder called source, and in the source folder, this is where the source of the entire website lives. It's all of the styles, it's all of the JavaScript, it's all the images, and most importantly, it's all those files that I'm managing. So if I go into documentation and I open up index.md, there's that documentation page we were looking at. There's a little block of metadata at the top that tells it the title of this page is documentation, and this page uses the documentation layout. And then there's a header, and there's some other markdown there that represents the paragraph. So if I go in and I edit this, we can then just say, you know, this doc needs more kittens. Let's see, place kitten. So if someone wants to make place sloth, I would really support you in that. I think that's the thing that needs to happen. So then there's our kitten. So the Markdown automatically updates live. There's a development server. So that's nice. We can just go in and we can add any content we want in here and edit it. And when we need to go make new pages, we just go make new files in the file system. So if I need to start adding tutorials, we can just add a new folder under documentation called tutorials. And then we can add a new file under there called index.md. And then, using the magic of design patterns, we can just copy stuff from somewhere else. And now we have some tutorials. That cat needs to be much bigger. Right, so now when we have a tutorials page, and that took me all of about 5 or 6 seconds, and I didn't really have to write any code. All I did was I just made a new file and I just dropped in some Markdown. So now I wrote a tutorial, so now I can actually go in and I need to, I need to figure out how to share this with my coworkers. So I need to start using Git. And I think there's a lot of, Git is a very complicated thing. And the reason it tends to be a little complicated is there aren't a lot of good real world analogs. But with a little bit of help from your developers, Git is actually very powerful. It's probably more powerful than any CMS revision, rollback, someone else is editing this page kind of tool you're likely to find. So I'm going to type in git status, and it's going to say, hey, look, you've changed all these files, and there's the one that I changed. So you change source documentation tutorials. You need to actually, this will tell you that you need to actually commit this to the repository. And commits are like saves. It's like hitting the save button. You want to hit it a lot. But it's even better than a save button because you can actually roll back to any of those saved states whenever you want. And all of those states have a message with them that describes the changes that you made. So I'm going to say, okay, I want to add all the files that I've been working on to this commit. And then if I actually type git status, again, it says, okay, these files are ready to be committed. You're going to commit. I made some changes before my talk, so you've got all those in there too. And you can see that I changed documentation, and I changed documentation tutorials. So then I can actually make a commit. I'm going to say, okay, git commit -a, which is all the files, -m, which is my message, and say, I'm going to writing docs. Write the docs. There we go. And it says, okay, you changed 5 files, you made 19 additions, you made 20 deletions, and you created this one file. That's great. So now I can actually roll back to that whenever I want. And if I want to see previous things I've done on this site, I can just say git log, and here's all the previous commits, which is me working on my demo. So there's me writing docs, there's me fixing some links, there's me removing some files I'm not using, there's me adding some deployment tools, there's my first commit. So this hasn't been around very long. On our actual developers website, I think we're a little over 2,500 commits. So that's 2,500 different states we can roll back to in any given time. So that's a very, very basic demo of Git, but I still haven't done anything. I still haven't shared this code with anyone. But I made a commit, right? So I can go see this on GitHub. Right? I should be able to see this on GitHub, right? I made a change. It's in there. I made a commit. Here's my write the docs example. The last change was over an hour ago. Why isn't it there? This is silly. I made a commit. Why doesn't it appear on GitHub? This is bad. And if you're a developer, you know exactly what I didn't do on purpose, which is type this. And this is probably where Git starts to fall apart for someone like a writer, because I can tell you that a commit is like saving your file, but I can't really explain what this means. And this is because of how Git is designed. It's designed as a distributed system. So everything has its own copy of all the files. There's no way that I can have a conflict with you because we're not even editing files in the same place. You're editing them on your computer and I'm editing them on mine. It's only when we try to recombine those things that there can be conflicts. So what this command does that I'm typing in, git push origin master, that's really low on the screen, I apologize. That's telling Git, okay, take my commits, I'm going to push them up somewhere. In that case, I'm pushing them to origin, which is what my GitHub is, and I want to push on the master branch. So when I do that, I can actually say, yes, internet is fast. Live demo, success. So you can see there it says, look, we're pushing to git@github.com, Patrick Arlt, write the docs example.git, and if I go back to GitHub, now I can see my changes. Here's my change. So now someone else can go and they can actually run the inverse of that command, which is git pull, the my remote master, and they can actually get that change. And one of the best things about GitHub is you don't actually have to install Git or install anything else to be able to make changes against things. You can actually just edit right on GitHub. And this is, fairly new in the last couple months. So you can see there's an edit button here, and I can click edit, and then I can actually go in and here's some Markdown. And I can edit that. We're going to say, yeah, look, I edited on GitHub. And then I can actually make a commit message right here. And I can commit my changes. And then that becomes part of the source of the repository. But the inverse also applies. We made a change on GitHub, and Git is a distributed system. So I'm not going to get changes unless I ask for them. So we run the inverse of the push command, which is pull. So in this case, I'm going to get pull origin master. And then we can actually see that Git has now pulled some changes on sourceindex.markdown, and I've gotten changes from someone else. And this scales really well across teams. And once you establish just the conventions of setting up your website, you have people pushing and pulling all day. We'll do dozens of pushes and pulls a day. We'll get dozens of changes, issues, fixing things. When authors need to push up documentation for the next version, they just say, hey, look, here's the stuff for the next version. You can review it, and then you can merge it in. So let's demo that. We wrote a tutorial. That's good. Kitten documentation is progressing well. We need to go to the next version. So we're going to check out a new copy of our website, right? Version 2. And the command for that's git checkout. So we want to check out a copy of our code, and we want to check it out onto a branch, which is B, version 2. So now we're on there. Now you can see that my shell has now helpfully told me I'm on version 2. And this is just a separate copy of my entire code base. Everything is still there. All the changes I made are still there, but now we're separated. So we have got the version of my code on master and the version of my code on version 2, and I can actually go make changes that are totally independent of this. So close out of those. So you can see that there's my edit on GitHub. There's that kitten I put in. There's the tutorials page with another kitten. We need to put kittens on the home page now. Let's put a really big kitten in there. So now we have a 1,000 by 1,000 pixel kitten, right? Git for cats. So, okay, now git status tells us you made a change to source index.markdown. Great. I want to commit that. Git commit -am. Right. More kittens. Please, like, actually make your commit messages. Like, don't do this in real life. This is for giggles, so everyone pays attention to my talk. So now we made a commit. Now we need to push it back. So then we can write git push origin. But instead of pushing to master, which is just going to take what I did on the other part of my code base that sits on my computer, I'm actually going to push up to version 2. And then this should say, okay, great, we made a new branch for you. We pushed from your version 2 to the version 2 that's up on GitHub. And if I go up to GitHub now, I've got here where this is the change I made on master, edited on GitHub. But then if I go up here, I can say, I want to actually look at version 2, and now there's a kitten, which is awesome. So I actually, now it's time to launch version 2. The kitten is ready. It's all there. That's all great. So now what I can do is I can make a pull request. And what pull requests are is they're just ways of comparing different versions of the same code base. So in this case, I will zoom in. And I will zoom in even more. Right, so we're showing you branches in this repository. So we're going to say, I want to go into master, and I want to go into master from version 2. And GitHub is actually going to helpfully show us what we changed between version 2 and master. And in this case, I only made one change. I deleted editing on GitHub, and I put in a giant picture of a kitten, which is awesome. So I'm going to say, that looks good. Create a pull request with more kittens. Right, send the pull request. That's good. And now someone else can go in and do a peer review on this documentation or on this kitten. Right, so I can be really mean, like, you know, stop putting kittens in the website. This is like me, pretty much. Like, no, you can't change the buttons. Right, so then that actually, you get inline commenting, you get to see the differences between different versions of the files, all sorts of that. So at this point, I'm actually, for the sake of demoing this, someone knows how to use GitHub. So we'll make them happy, and then we'll confirm this. So we're going to, okay, say, all right, this is a good change. We want this in the website. You can confirm the merge, and then that becomes part of master. So if I go back, I can actually look at source, and I can look at index.md, and there's our kitten. So now we've merged changes from somewhere else in our project. We've got a new version of everything, and we've merged it in. So that's some Git basics, and that's kind of how our editing workflow works. So the one last thing that I do want to touch on really briefly is deployment. The output of all these static site generators is actually just static HTML. So I'm going to run rm rf build, clean out the build folder for a sec just for the demo, and then I'm going to run middleman build. And what middleman build does is it just tells middleman, okay, I'm ready to deploy. I want you to build my entire website. And it's really nice about it. It says, okay, I'm going to create your style sheets for you. I'm going to process your Markdown into HTML. I'm going to copy all your pages so that they have pretty URLs, so we can see it built out all those files. There's index.html, there's documentation tutorials index.html, there's documentation. And then if I actually just open this up, I'll prove to you this works. right? There's our website. It's actually just a bunch of static HTML files. And the best part about that is it's really easy to deploy static HTML files to anywhere. What we're doing right now is at the R&D center, we're actually just copying these HTML files around to different servers. So each branch is a different batch of HTML. So we've done a lot of, spent a lot of time automating our build processes to kind of take some of this away. Unmute, go back to my talk. See if this works. Maybe. Come on. Well, close enough. So why did we do this? This seems like it's, maybe you're thinking, this seems like it's really complicated. This seems like it's just a lot harder than using a CMS. And it might be until you think about what this gives us. We have total control over our website. We have absolute control. There isn't another framework or another content system or anyone telling us how we have to build, how we have to structure our navigation, how we have to create our post taxonomies, what formats we're going to use. We could switch Markdown out with something else. We could switch it out with ASCII doc. We could just make everyone write HTML. We could, use Dita for hell, whatever. Right? These systems are really flexible too. We've done some really interesting things like making systems that actually pull pages from other GitHub repositories because teams wanted to maintain sample code in 2 places. So we just said, okay, make a Markdown file, and in that Markdown file, just put a link to your other Markdown file, and we'll pull it down for you, and then you don't have to maintain code in 2 places. So these are very flexible systems, and you can build tons and tons of custom solutions on top of them. And it's actually easy to do that. It's not difficult to write a plugin for a lot of these systems or difficult to extend them because the libraries are built with extensibility in mind. Middleman has an entire section of documentation called extensions that document how to manipulate the files. How do you create pages that don't exist? How do you pull down remote data sources and generate pages out of them? All kinds of interesting and useful things that you can use to build those custom tools. And this also means that teams have a lot more ownership over their documentation because suddenly anyone, anywhere who can see our GitHub can edit it. And we do all this privately on GitHub, but anyone who has a GitHub account and is part of the Esri organization can edit documentation now. Because they can create a fork of the website, they can edit it, and then they can issue a pull request back to the main copy and say, I've improved the documentation. I want you to review my changes and accept my pull request. And it encourages the collaboration, right? So and it lets people kind of see and review the files. We do a lot of work with issues where people file issues on doc, someone issues a pull request, they fix the doc. That's starting to happen more and more. And then more, teams are saying, well, what if I want my doc to do this? What if I need to style my tables differently? What if I need to do this? And they're getting more involved in the development of the documentation. So, this didn't go over easy. Not everyone was just like, we're going to sing Kumbaya and throw flowers in the air and Markdown is our new god. Like, this didn't go over easy. One of the things that definitely came up very early on for us was, but does everyone have to learn all of this? And the answer is kind of like, well, yes. Like, if you're going to contribute to a system like this, you do have to know the basics. You have to know where to find the files, and you have to know Markdown, or at very least you need to know where to hit the edit button on GitHub. But is hitting the edit button on GitHub, is that any higher of a barrier to entry than onboarding a new person into a complicated CMS system? We've outlined some procedures for editors and proofreaders to go in where a documentation author will just make a new issue and say, I want someone to proofread this document. And you can automate things like, if someone makes a new issue with a tag of proofreading, let's send an email to the proofreading mailing list and tell them, hey, someone wants this document edited, and then they can go in and do this exact same system. And then there's a pull request, and you can actually comment on individual changes inside of that, which is really exciting. One of the other things is, but we actually still are using our CMS a lot. Like, we haven't moved probably even 50% of the documentation out of it yet, but that's okay. Because if your CMS outputs to static files, you just have two folders, you merge the folders together and deploy that. If you're using a system like WordPress or Drupal or anything else, servers like Nginx or Apache will actually just let you serve static files alongside your regular content system. And if it finds a static file that matches a URL the user wants, it just serves them that file. And if it doesn't, it just goes into your CMS, and then your CMS can try to serve the user what they want. So it actually integrates really seamlessly there, even if you have an existing CMS, because of the nature of how a lot of this stuff works, and serving static files is really easy. We've been doing it forever. That was like the original web. We're getting back to like, this is the web you messed around with in like the 90s. It's a bunch of HTML files sitting on a server somewhere. And then the one other thing that we had to find is, but everyone has to preview the site locally. I've got to install Ruby, and I've got to install Middleman, and I've got to install Git, and I've got to install Node, and I've got to install all this stuff. And that's also true, but you can also just automate all that away. We've been trying to make a lot of progress with automating our build tools so that whenever you push a change on GitHub anywhere related to our website, you automatically get a free preview server on Amazon. We actually automatically build the website, we push it up to Amazon, and we'll email you a link to a URL that you can go look at it at. And we're starting to build these tools to automate that and starting to think about that. We've got a lot of manual tools for doing that right now, and we can automate it even further so that if someone edits something on GitHub, we can just automate the process of building the entire website and they can preview their work right away. That's something that's definitely in the direction we're going. We're looking at building more and more custom tooling for teams. Can we tie into other GitHub repos that those teams are hosting for sample code, for additional documentation? Can we make it easy for them to pull in extra stuff? What if we need to, split different versions of different files and display them at the same time? Those are all things that we're thinking about. And we're thinking about training more and more people in this system. I'm doing meetings later this week with a few dozen people to get them set up and to get them contributing doc under this system, and trying to find ways to make it easier to onboard people in this kind of a way. Right? So in the end, what this is doing is this is bringing my team of developers and designers, it's bringing us a lot closer to the people who write the documentation, and it's bringing us closer to our customers, because our customers are telling the things to the people who write the doc, and they're like, I want this kind of documentation. I want you to do more examples. I want you to do deeper API references. And they're bringing that back to us. So it's bringing us closer together. We have weekly meetings now where we discuss, do we need additional features? What teams are we going to bring into this system next? What features do we need to build? And the people who write documentation are starting to think more like developers. They're starting to think, well, if you can build us custom tools that scrape other GitHub sites for documentation, can you do this too? Can you do this other feature? What if we could integrate forum comments? What if we could integrate all this other stuff? What if we could try to make our documentation better? They start thinking outside the box of, I don't just write documentation. I write documentation, but I can also contribute to a larger project. And this is what's really encouraging when we're doing this, is this is encouraging our collaboration with the rest of Esri, because we're in a 20-person R&D center up in Portland, and there's several hundred other people who are writing most of our content in Redlands, California. But it actually brings us closer in collaboration with them to build a good experience for developers by building better tools. So that is all I have. I'll make that way bigger. There we go. Thanks a lot, everybody. Yeah, I have time for a couple questions, I've been told, so I'm sure there will be some.